I returned home from deployment and found my best friend living with my wife. What I did. Next. My name is Mendy Dice. I'm 32 years old. I've served 3 tours, survived 1 ambush that should have killed me, and built a marriage I believed in with everything I had. I'm not telling you this story because I want sympathy. I'm telling you this story because I want you to understand something that took me a long time to understand myself, that the most dangerous kind of betrayal isn't the loud kind. It's not the screaming, the slamming doors, the dramatic confession. The most dangerous kind is the quiet kind, the kind that gets dressed every morning, makes coffee, sits at your table, and smiles at you like it belongs there. This is the story of the week I came home from my 3rd deployment and found out that the 2 people I trusted most in the world had been quietly dismantling my life while I was overseas protecting theirs. And this is the story of what I did about it, not with my fists, not with my voice, but with the one weapon the military had spent years sharpening inside me without me even realizing it. My stillness. Please, before I continue, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. The cab pulled away before I even reached the door. I stood on the front step of my own house with my duffel bag on my shoulder and my key already in my hand, and I just stood there for a second. 8 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. I'd counted every single one. The house looked the same from the outside. Same green shutters, same crack in the second porch step that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. But something felt different in the air, and I'd been trained long enough to trust that feeling before I could explain it. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled different. Not bad, just off. Like the house had been breathing someone else's air for long enough that it had forgotten mine. There was a faint trace of a cologne I recognized and couldn't immediately place, and it had settled into the curtains, the carpet, the way a smell does when it's been somewhere long enough to stop being a guest. I noticed it the same way I notice everything, quietly, without reacting. The way you learn to notice things when reacting too early can get people killed. I set my bag down slowly. I scanned the room. Corners first, then surfaces, then exits. Old habit. Then the kitchen. 2 mugs on the table, both used, both still faintly warm when I held my hand above them without touching them. One had a ring of dusty rose lipstick on the rim, Sheila's shade, the one she'd been wearing since our 2nd year together. The other was plain, a man's mug, and it was sitting on my side of the table, the side I always took, the side that Sheila had told me she left empty when I was gone because it made the house feel less hollow. It was not empty. I pulled out a chair, not my side, and sat down. I folded my hands on the table. I didn't pick up the mugs. I didn't move them. I left everything exactly as I found it, and I sat there in the quiet of my own kitchen, and I waited. Because here's what 8 months in a combat zone teaches you about the moment before something happens. It teaches you to let it come to you. Don't chase it. Don't announce yourself. Let it come. It came. Footsteps. Upstairs, slow and unhurried, the footsteps of someone who had absolutely no reason to think that the man whose name was on the deed of this house had just walked through the front door. Sheila appeared at the top of the stairs, and the shock on her face lasted half a second before the smile replaced it. A normal man would have missed it. I didn't. I filed it away without moving a single muscle in my expression and opened my arms when she came down fast. She wrapped around me and I held her, fully, genuinely, because I loved my wife. That part was still true. But over her shoulder, my eyes went straight back to the staircase. She was positioned between me and those stairs, subtly, instinctively, like a door she didn't want opened. I pulled back and held her face. "I wanted to surprise you," I said. I meant it. Then, softly, same tone, no change at all. "Who's upstairs, Sheila?" The smallest flicker crossed her face. Her chin didn't move, her eyes held, but her breath caught for exactly 1 count. "What? Who's upstairs?" Not a question the second time. She laughed too quickly. "Mendy, I—" A door opened at the top of the stairs, a floorboard creaked, and then a voice I knew better than almost any voice on earth drifted down from the shadows. "Mendy? Bro? Is that you?" Bart Weld came down my stairs wearing my gray robe, the one with MD embroidered on the chest that Sheila gave me for my birthday. His hair was sleep-rumpled, his feet were bare, and he looked comfortable. Not guilty comfortable. Settled comfortable, like a man who'd been somewhere long enough that ease came without thinking. "Mendy," he started. "I know," I said. "It's not what it looks like." He blinked. "Exactly. Man, listen. Sit down. One beat. Both of you, at the table." Nobody argued. They sat on their side, the side with both mugs. I remained standing. I didn't pace. I didn't raise my voice. I stood the way I'd stood in worse rooms than this one, waiting out worse things than two people with rehearsed faces. I went to the cabinet, took out a third mug, poured coffee from a machine someone else had started that morning, sat down across from them. "Okay," I said. "Talk." Sheila opened her mouth first. I held up one finger without looking at her, keeping my eyes on Bart. Him first. Bart talked for 11 minutes. The story was smooth, dangerously smooth. 6 weeks between apartments, difficult landlord. Sheila offered the guest room, temporary. He even showed me an apartment listing on his phone. I looked at it for 2 seconds and handed it back. The listing was dated 3 months ago. That was hole 1. When Bart said guest room, Sheila's eyes moved up and left, the involuntary flicker of someone accessing imagination rather than memory. Hole 2. The robe belt was tied to the right. I always tie mine left because of an old shoulder injury. Either Bart got it wrong, or Sheila tied it for him this morning, from the front, the way she always ties mine. Hole 3. I let them finish. Nodded slowly. "Thanks for explaining." Bart exhaled. Sheila reached across and touched my hand. "I missed you so much." "I know," I said. I stood up, rinsed my mug, set it on the rack. "I'm going to shower, then unpack." I walked to the stairs, stopped. Without turning, "Bart, your new lease, when does it start?" Half a second too long. 2 weeks, he said. I nodded once and went upstairs. I didn't shower. I called Demi. Demi answered before the second ring finished. Her voice wasn't surprised. It was relieved. "Oh, thank God, Mendy." I sat on the edge of the tub. "Tell me," I said. She told me about the 1 a.m. call Sheila made 4 months into my deployment, about the bathroom floor and the quiet crying, about the question she'd asked, "Is Bart there more than he should be?" And the silence that lasted too long before Sheila said he's just helping and hung up, about how Sheila stopped answering her texts a week later entirely. I listened without speaking. Then Demi said the part that changed everything. "There's a loan, Mendy." I went still. What loan? She'd been asked to co-sign. She refused, told Sheila to tell me, assumed it never happened. "How much?" The pause told me before the number did. She mentioned 40,000. Downstairs, I could hear Sheila and Bart's voices, low, careful, coordinated. "Against the house?" I asked. Demi said yes. I breathed out once through my nose. "You tried to warn her," I said. "Don't be sorry for that." I hung up, went back downstairs, sat at the table. "The house looks great. You ended up skipping the renovations?" Sheila's spatula hand stopped moving for exactly 1 second. For 72 hours, I was the warmest version of myself I could perform. I laughed at Bart's jokes. I ate Sheila's cooking. I watched television in the same room as the man wearing my robe in my house. Nobody could tell. But in those 72 hours, I did 3 things they couldn't see. I called Opal, my grandmother's estate attorney. She confirmed a $40,000 lien against the property. 1 signature on file, Mendy Dice. I called Pruitt, my unit brother, and asked if Bart had reached out before my return. "Yeah," Pruitt said slowly. "Said he was planning a welcome home thing." There was no party. Bart had managed the timeline. He'd used Pruitt to calculate exactly how much preparation time he had. On the second night, while Sheila slept, I opened her laptop. I'd set it up, I knew the password, and found a bank account in the autofill field I didn't recognize. I couldn't access it, but the name was visible. Sheila B. Weld J. Joint Savings, Weld. Bart's last name. I closed the laptop, lay back down beside my wife. She rolled over and placed her hand on my chest in her sleep. I stared at the ceiling, still as a statue, her hand over my heart. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the car registration. The manila folder was in the second drawer of the file cabinet we'd shared for 5 years. Labeled in Sheila's handwriting, Transition Plan. I opened it at the kitchen table. Alone. Bart was out. Sheila was at the grocery store. Another new habit I'd clocked. She timed her errands so only one of them was with me at once. Inside the folder, a separation agreement draft, dated 5 months ago, bearing a downtown attorney's letterhead. A handwritten checklist titled What I Need Before I Tell Him. Items checked off. Attorney consult, savings secured, guest room established. One item still unchecked, Tell Mendy, and a photograph of my house printed from a real estate listing site. Estimated value, $340,000. An agent's contact at the bottom. They were going to sell it. My grandmother's house. The house her will stipulated couldn't be sold within 10 years without both spouses signing. I put the folder back exactly as I found it. Called Opal again. I need every legal option I have, I said, starting with what protects the house. The front door opened. Sheila's voice floated in lightly. Mendy, you okay? Yeah, baby, I said, phone still at my ear. Just catching up with an old friend. On the 4th evening, I cooked. 3 courses, sit down, the way I'd learned on deployment when the unit cook got sick and someone had to step up. Bart sat across from me, relaxed. The rehearsed story had held 4 days. He thought the worst had passed. All he had to do was move out in 2 weeks and everything would slowly normalize. When the plates were cleared, I reached under my chair and slid an envelope across the table. Open it, I said. Inside, the deed with the lien highlighted yellow, Opal's letter detailing the inheritance clause, any equity extraction beyond agreed marital finances, a trust violation. The house was legally protected, and Opal had already moved to challenge the lien. Sheila had gone white across the table. I filled Bart's water glass. I also spoke to Pruitt, I said pleasantly. He says hi. Bart's hands went flat on the table. Sheila pushed her chair back. Mendy, please, just let me. I looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time since I'd been home. I've been letting you explain for 4 days, I said softly. Tonight, I'm the one who talks. In the silence after I spoke, Bart's phone buzzed on the table. He grabbed it fast, too fast, and flipped it face down. But I'd already seen the screen. A name, Reese, and the first 3 words of a preview. Is he going to... I didn't react. I filed the name and kept moving. Later, alone, I searched Reese Weld and got nothing. Tried 2 other combinations. What came up instead was a real estate agent's profile, Reese Holloway. Specialty, estate sales and probate property transactions. She was already working the listing. My grandmother's house already had an agent. Bart gathered his things from the guest room before midnight and left without asking to stay. He knew it was over. At the front door he stopped, turned. Mendy, I'm sorry, for what that's worth. I held the door and looked at him, this man who'd sat on my mother's porch and made a blood promise the night before we both enlisted. This man I would have died for. It's worth exactly what your blood promise was worth, I said. I closed the door. The morning after Bart left, I made 3 calls. First, Opal. I formally initiated the lien challenge. The house was vulnerable to recovery, given the lack of proper marital financial disclosure. She said it would take time. I said that was fine. Second, the bank. I couldn't access the joint account Bart and Sheila shared, but I requested a formal notice be placed on large withdrawals pending my attorney's correspondence on marital asset disputes. The compliance officer said the process took 48 hours. I said that was fine too. Third, and quietest, Reese Holloway. When she answered, I introduced myself simply as the legal owner of 14 Linden Street and told her any listing discussed without my consent was done without legal authorization. My attorney would be in touch. I hung up before she could respond. By noon, Reese had called Bart. Bart had called Sheila, and Sheila stood in the kitchen doorway with her phone at her side, every mask finally gone, and underneath them was just fear. How long have you known? She asked. Since the coffee mugs, I said. Day 1. She slid down the kitchen wall until she was sitting on the floor. I pulled a chair from the table and sat across from her, same level, because this next conversation was the most important one we'd ever have. We sat on that floor for 2 hours. She talked, really talked, for the first time in longer than either of us could name. She told me about the loneliness, not the angry kind, the quiet, erosive kind that she'd never known how to say out loud. She told me about the business debt she'd carried silently since before our marriage, the shame of it growing heavier every year. She told me Bart had simply been there, and she'd been drowning, and the choices she made in that drowning weren't ones she could reverse. She said she didn't know if what she'd felt for him was love or just the relief of not being alone. She thought it was probably the second one. She said that felt worse. She said she was sorry. The real kind. The kind that knows it might not be enough and says it anyway. I listened to all of it without filling a single silence. Then I asked her one question. The house. Were you going to tell me before you listed it? Or was I going to come home to a for sale sign? She couldn't answer, couldn't. Her silence told me everything the folder already had. But hearing it from her, that was a different kind of hurt entirely. Okay, I said. I got up. I didn't help her up. I went upstairs. In the morning, my side of the closet was half emptied. Carefully. Precisely half. A packed bag by the door. An envelope on the dresser with her name on the front. Inside it, Opal's legal notice locking the house under protected trust review. No sale, no extraction, no transfer without court approval. My grandmother's house was safe. And a handwritten letter. 3 paragraphs. It said, I came home ready to fight for this. I want you to know that. I didn't land already decided. But I found the folder, Sheila. The transition plan you had already chosen before I walked through that door, before I poured coffee in my own kitchen. I'm not leaving because of the loneliness. I'm leaving because you planned to sell the last piece of my grandmother that exists in this world and hand me the paperwork after. That's the part I can't get past. Not the betrayal. The planning. I hope you find what you were looking for. I genuinely do. She called before she finished the second paragraph. I didn't answer. 5 more times before I reached the end of Linden Street, the same street where Bart and I made our promise on a porch a lifetime ago. I stopped, looked back at the house, still mine. I made sure of that. I answered. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then she said through tears, I'm going to fix this. And I said the thing that surprised even me. I know you will. That's why I answered. I kept walking. The call stayed open, and I still don't know what comes next. Neither do you.